Lord of Invention, from paper to pixels, the evolution of the printing press. In a world where information flows freely through digital screens, it's hard to imagine a time when words and knowledge were confined to handwritten manuscripts. But one invention changed everything. One invention, simple in its mechanics yet revolutionary in its effect, set the stage for the modern world as we know it today. This is the story of the printing press, an invention that transformed humanity's ability to share knowledge, drive change, and spark revolutions. It's a tale of ambition, persistence, and the power of words. Before the printing press, books were incredibly rare and expensive, often reserved for the church, the elite, and the nobility. Knowledge was a commodity, locked behind gates of privilege and power. The vast majority of the people, the peasants, the farmers, and the artisans, had no access to the written word. Books, once written, were guarded treasures. They were handwritten, painstakingly copied by scribes or monks who spent months or even years on a single manuscript. In those days, books were luxuries. The world before the printing press was a world where information was scarce and literacy was confined to the privileged few. Imagine a time when the very act of reading or owning a book was an elite privilege. There were no public libraries, no bookstores with rows upon rows of printed literature. Everything was personal and private, shared only among the rich and the religious. The idea of mass communication was foreign to the masses. To even have access to written knowledge was rare, let alone the ability to distribute it. The process of creating a book back then was labor-intensive. A single manuscript could take a scribe months to copy. Every page, every line, every letter had to be written by hand. The ink was often mixed by hand as well, and parchment or vellum was used for the writing surface. The method was slow, tedious, and expensive. Mistakes could ruin entire pages, wasting days or even weeks of work. Books were scarce, and the knowledge they contained was a luxury. It was a time when words were held in captivity, accessible only to the most privileged people in society. But as the 15th century dawned, a shift was coming. Europe was on the verge of an intellectual explosion, the Renaissance. This was a time when ideas were flourishing, and thinkers, philosophers, and scientists were pushing the boundaries of what was known. People were beginning to demand access to more knowledge. They were hungry for learning. The world was about to experience a revolution of information, and it would all begin with a single invention, one that would forever alter the way knowledge was shared. The man who would change everything was Johannes Gutenberg. A German blacksmith, printer, and publisher, Gutenberg would go on to invent the movable type printing press, an invention that would change the course of history. It was around 1440 that Gutenberg began working on his press, and what he developed would be unlike anything the world had ever seen. The idea behind Gutenberg's invention was deceptively simple: movable metal type. In other words, letters and characters could be individually cast, arranged, and rearranged to form words, sentences, and entire pages. This concept allowed for the mass production of books, eliminating the need for hand copying each page. Gutenberg's press was the culmination of years of experimentation and work. He did not invent printing itself, but he perfected a method that made it efficient and scalable. The technology that he created made it possible to print books quickly and in large numbers. For the first time in history, people would be able to produce books on a mass scale, and those books would no longer be exclusive to the rich or the powerful. In the 1550s, Gutenberg printed his greatest work, the Gutenberg Bible. This book, printed with movable type, is considered the first major book ever printed using this method. It wasn't just the first Bible, it was a symbol of change. It was the first of its kind to be printed on a press. The Gutenberg Bible was a turning point in human history.
It was no longer confined to the wealthy or religious elite. For the first time, a printed book was widely available and people could access religious texts that were previously locked away. The Gutenberg Bible's impact extended far beyond the religious world. It changed the entire structure of society. The invention of the printing press didn't just affect religion, it changed everything. The printing press gave birth to the Protestant Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther. Luther's 95 Theses, written in protest against the Catholic Church, were printed and spread across Europe like wildfire. Without the printing press, Luther's radical ideas would have remained confined to his small circle, but with it, Luther's thoughts reached far and wide, challenging the authority of the Church and triggering a massive religious and social upheaval. Gutenberg's printing press didn't just fuel the Reformation, it also sparked the Renaissance, a cultural movement that saw an explosion of art, literature, and science. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, scientists like Galileo Galilei, and writers like William Shakespeare all had their work published and spread thanks to Gutenberg's invention. The printing press allowed for these ideas to be disseminated quickly, allowing for new ways of thinking and new discoveries to reach the masses. Before the printing press, knowledge was slow to spread. It was trapped in the hands of a few, and it took time to travel from one person to another. But with the advent of the printing press, information could be shared in an instant. Writers, thinkers, and scientists were able to communicate their ideas to an ever-widening audience. The printing press allowed for the free exchange of ideas, for knowledge to be spread more rapidly than ever before, and it gave birth to a world of learning, innovation, and discovery. As the printing press spread across Europe, it began to have an undeniable impact on every aspect of society. The Church was no longer the sole authority on religious matters. The press allowed people to read, interpret, and question religious texts on their own. It gave birth to the modern scientific method, as new discoveries could be shared, tested, and challenged. The printing press allowed the Enlightenment to unfold, leading to an era where people began to question authority, champion reason, and demand the rights and freedoms that we take for granted today. But even as the world changed, the printing press itself would continue to evolve. Over the next few centuries, the printing press would be adapted and improved. In the 19th century, the steam-powered printing press was introduced, allowing for even faster production of books and newspapers. Newspapers, magazines, and pamphlets would quickly become a dominant source of information. The print industry boomed, and mass communication became a central part of society. As technology advanced, the printing press would face competition. In the 20th century, the rise of digital technology began to threaten the traditional printing press. But even as we entered the age of digital technology, e-books, and social media, the legacy of the printing press remains. The printing press laid the foundation for our modern world of information. Without Gutenberg's invention, there would be no books, no newspapers, no digital media, no social networks. The world would look radically different. Today, we live in a world of instant communication. We have access to a nearly infinite library of knowledge at the touch of a button. E-books, websites, social media platforms, and digital archives make information more accessible than ever before. The digital revolution we're experiencing is in many ways the continuation of the process set in motion by Gutenberg's printing press. The printing press didn't just change the way we make books, it changed the way we make history. It gave birth to a new era of knowledge, creativity, and innovation that still thrives today. And as we look toward the future of technology, artificial intelligence, space exploration, and digital media, it's important to remember that the inventions of the past laid the groundwork for the world we live in today. The printing press was just the beginning. It was the spark that ignited the fire of progress and innovation. The impact of the printing press is immeasurable. It didn't just affect the way we read, it affected the way we think, the way we interact, and the way we live. And as we look toward the future, we can be sure of one thing: the quest for knowledge and the free exchange of ideas will continue, just as it began with a single press of ink. The printing press was one of the greatest inventions in history, and its legacy continues to shape our world in ways we may not even fully understand yet. The next time you pick up a book, scroll through a digital article, or read a tweet, remember this: it all started with a single press of ink, a moment in history that set the course for a world of ideas, discovery, and communication.